Welcome to the Behind the Wind podcast. I'm Lauren Lane. For over 50 years, the LSI team has been dedicated to the science of business development. We've seen the impact of our work and how it's evolved into economic development and now social impact work. This week, we're excited to meet with Jason Szyminski, LSI's new Chief Growth Officer. Sean and Jason are going to discuss Jason's background and career, leveraging LSI for proposal success, business development growth and strategies, and the future of the Behind the Wind podcast. Let's jump in.
Like I said, I appreciate you spending this time this morning. I know that you've got a lot on your plate, which we're going to get into and talk about some of the exciting things that you've identified and have envisioned for LSI. But before we do, maybe just talk about your background and some of your career history. You and I have known each other for a long time, and we're a client of ours for many years. I think that puts you in a unique position as well.
It did, and yeah. So I can go ahead and go through my sort of background, and we can go off on tangents as we decide to. It's a bit of an interesting background, and it's got a lot of twists and turns to it. So I'll kind of walk you through the path and how I got to where I'm at now. And it's been like I said, an interesting sort of path that I've taken, but not traditional. But first and foremost, married with 3 children, 2 girls and a boy, 13, 14, 15. So we're ramping up for, the 16-year-old driving and all those fun things, in addition to, my day job, which is, working with you guys. So that's all going on in the background here at home, which makes things, incredibly exciting, and working with all the sporting events and the cheerleading events and all those things that keep us busy in our quote unquote off time. So that's something that, is a part of me and a part of, my life, and has shaped my career. And that's been something that, it's important to me. And I know that our company, it really does play stock in family, which is, one of the things that I found incredibly interesting about LSI, and it's like a family atmosphere there. So wanted to get that out, so starting from, the beginning, if you will. I did my undergraduate at Dickinson College in Pennsylvania here, with a biology degree. In college, I played football, did strong safety, also did ROTC, and did a couple other things there in terms of getting myself ready for the real world. And the ROTC piece really turned out to be a pivotal moment in, I think, my life, because when I graduated, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant. And, one of the interesting things about going through the ROTC program and getting commissioned as a lieutenant is you go off to this camp called Advanced Camp for 6 weeks during the summer and come back. And based on your score, you get to choose the path, the military occupational specialty, or MOS, in the Army that you want to go into. And of course, my first choice was I wanted to fly helicopters. And then I took the eye test and failed it miserably because I couldn't see anything, and stigmatism. And so then I said, okay, now, let's dust the dust off the dust and see where we're at. And well, I've got a degree in biology, and, there's this weapons of mass destruction thing in the Army where they do weapons of mass destruction defense. And it seemed like a good fit at the time. And so I chose that, got selected into weapons of mass destruction. It's called chemical defense in the Army, and was promptly shipped off to Alabama to do VX nerve agent training, live nerve agent training, and spent several months there. And then the Army thought it was in my best interest to spend the next 2 years over in Korea on the demilitarized zone, where I had the pleasure of serving in a air assault light infantry unit, which was not even something that I had planned on doing, but quickly got accustomed to, sleeping in holes in the ground and eating dirt and doing all that fun stuff where, I was planning for, chemical attacks. And then following that, I got selected to be a platoon leader for a heavy decontamination platoon. So basically when and if something bad happened, we would come in and clean everybody off, and then they can get back into the fight. So that was a really interesting time. We did a lot of analysis in terms of intelligence and planning for operations, and it was a very, very challenging time, but an interesting time. And I think it shapes you as a person. When you're pulled away from things and put into a challenging situation like that. So that was definitely a part of my career that, wasn't, you look back on it now, and at the time it was, pretty miserable. But looking back onto it now, I think it really builds character and, I think served me well. When I got done with the Korea stint, I came back to the US and found myself in Fort Hood, Texas, where I was doing strategy and planning, which was actually really interesting, working on what we called at the time was Force 21, which was looking at the future battle space, integrating drone technologies, looking at different mobility, survivability techniques, tactics, procedures, and that sort of got me into the an analyst realm. So that was my plan from the beginning. Really, was to do my 4 years in the Army and move on to get a quote unquote real job. And I did. One of the good things that I was exposed to was the transition out of the Army into the civilian world. They had done a really good job of bringing in a lot of organizations, headhunter type organizations and job placement organizations, and managed to link up with this small company that was doing work for Northrop Grumman, and they had a really niche, interesting contract with this agency called the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, or DTRA. At the time, I knew little, if anything, about them. All I knew that they were a obscure agency that was in the DC area, and they wanted to bring me in for an interview, and I agreed. And from there, that sort of sprung me into the next sector of my career, where I ended up getting hired by Northrop to work as an operations planning analyst for DTRA, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and it was an advisory and assistance type role where I was serving as a government augmentee, basically a staff augmentee. So we were integrated into the office, given a different colored badge, but sat next to the govies and did all the work with all the government folks. After about a year of doing that, my government boss at the time said, "Why don't you just come work for the government?" I said, "Well, how do you do that?" I've never even thought about that as a possibility. He's like, "Well, I open up a job and we interview for the job, and you get the job and come work for us." So I did, and that sent me off to my government employee days, and for the next 13 years, and it was really amazing. For the next 13 years, I enjoyed an amazing career with DTRA, and really got to do things that I couldn't even imagine. And I'll go through some of those. But it was an amazing decision to move over and to work for the government, and it's something I just never had thought that I'd be doing. And I ended up spending 13 years there, traveling the world, doing transnational and irregular threats, doing intel analysis, and really, doing a lot of detailed planning and analysis, which I'll get into, I think, a little later. But I think there's the connection there between the business world and the government world, and how we, in the government world, or in the defense world more correctly, really incorporate intelligence analysis. And we do business intelligence, and the planning and the strategy, and being able to pull the pieces together, but remain flexible enough to adjust as necessary. And that's something that I felt was a real connection between the two, because I think, a lot of times I ask myself, how did I get here in the business world after doing what I did? And looking back at it, there really are a lot of connections, Sean. So that's an interesting piece. We can kind of go off that, but I'll tell you a little bit about the work I did in DTRA for those 13 years. It was amazing. I worked with pretty much every single combatant commander out there. And as we all know, the world is divided into slices, and the combatant commanders own that ground. And we as a combat support agency, and that's the unique thing about what DTRA is. It's a combat support agency, and it's a defense agency at the same time. So it has different tiers of mission sets, one of which is supporting those warfighters, supporting those commanders that are actually out there conducting those missions. One of the first commanders that I had the pleasure of supporting was U.S. CENTCOM, and we'll all remember it was the lead up to Operation Iraqi Freedom, OIF, where all of the crazy intel at the time, and do they or do they not have WMD, and where are the WMD hidden? So we were all part of that. I was a consumer of the same intelligence that everybody else across the world was getting fed about, that, hey, there's going to be this massive caches of weapons of mass destruction and nerve agent. So being DTRA, CENTCOM charged us with basically building the plan that hadn't existed before, as to how do you fight a war where there's caches of weapons of mass destruction, where they can be potentially used on the battle space against our forces. I think the last time was World War I, the trenches where they were using chlorine gas. So we had to really almost start from scratch. And this is where I think a lot of the planning comes in, taking the available information and intelligence and coming up with new ways of doing things that just hadn't existed before. We sat down it was funny because we called it Coalition Village. All the coalition partners for OIF were down in the parking lot in CENTCOM in Tampa, Florida, in each of their own little individual, it was like double wide trailers. And we were down there as one of ours, and you'd run back and forth and literally develop these plans on the fly. And one of the big things was sensitive site exploitation. I'm sure you hear about that in the news now, but at the time it was unheard of. It was, how do you go in through a site that could potentially have all sorts of things there? And then we had to think about things that no one else thought about, because it was, okay, chain of custody. We need to make sure that we understand where this stuff came from. We need to understand, what the disposition of it was. And if you're going to have U.S. forces or U.S. Special Operations Forces going into rooms, they need to know what to look for. So we had to, all the way down to developing little books that would fit inside of people's pockets that open that up and say, look, what is this? It's like a picture book, and, don't touch this, touch this, to that level of detail. And it was just an incredible experience. And then after, OIF kicked off, and we had trouble actually finding things, but they did find, bits and pieces from, a long time ago, from previous wars. But, the planning was done. And the good news was that, nothing transpired. But again, it was the planning work that went into it. So it was incredible. And then from there, it took another turn. We moved out of the conventional war space into the national security strategy, where it shifted into the global war on terrorism. Obviously 9/11 and all the associated components with that. And then we being DTRA, developed a relationship. We have always had one, but it expanded our relationship with SOCOM, Special Operations Command. And SOCOM was designated as the lead combatant command for synchronizing all global weapons of mass destruction planning and execution. So DTRA and SOCOM sort of were forced into this, marriage of convenience, where we knew how to do weapons of mass destruction and they knew how to make bad guys go away. So we sort of got to work together. And I spent a lot of time down in Tampa, this time on the other side of the road, where it wasn't CENTCOM, it was SOCOM. And we developed the plans for countering global and transnational weapons of mass destruction. And then also working with each of the other combatant commanders, because SOCOM was the lead. So we developed the plan. And that's what the Army in the military does, is develop strategic plans. So we developed the global strategic plan for countering weapons of mass destruction, and then went around to all of the other combatant commanders and helped them build theirs. Had a lot of interactions with partners and allies, the intelligence community. It was just a really, really interesting time working with those professionals in SOCOM, which is just an incredible group of people. When they say Special Operations Command, they truly mean special people. It really is. And, they were able to do things that were unheard of. And I think, it's the notion of proving a negative, and the times that, things that were done and it resulted in something not happening is what I think that, the world misses. It's, what were those things that we did or they did that prevented something from occurring in the future? That's hard to measure, but that's really what it came down to in terms of, preventing proliferation and, stopping a ship that had certain things on it, or taking something away from someone that caused them not to have the key components to build what they wanted to build. It was really interesting work. And then I got pulled back into DTRA, into a more of a leadership role, where I picked up the job as the deputy director for the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction enterprise. And my focus there was really more on international partners, working with synchronization for our partners and allies. And then I got an opportunity that, again, another twist in my career. I had the opportunity to apply for the DoD SES qualification program, which is the Defense Senior Leader Development Program. And what that is it's a 3-year program that really prepares you for, the senior leadership roles in the department. And incredible program. Two of the qualifications, or two of the requirements, I should say, for graduation were going through the program itself, obviously, but then also at the completion of the program was applying for and getting accepted into and completing a senior service school. And the senior service schools are, the National Defense University, National War College, the Army War College. So I chose the National Defense University, National War College here in DC, and completed their in-resident program for national security studies. My focus was Middle East and North Africa. I did field studies in Israel and Jordan, and just had an amazing time. And then one of the other requirements was they call it an experiential assignment, where you had to find a position that you haven't been in a role that you haven't done before. And I chose to go into a special assistant role for the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction, where I ran the chemical weapons defense portfolio. So what that entailed was all of the U.S. chemical weapons that we had, and we did have quite a bit. We were undergoing destruction of those at various sites around the U.S. So this office oversaw the destruction of those, as well as we're a party to the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons Treaty. The U.S. is, as well as 193 other countries. So I was a representative to the OPCW in Hague, in the Netherlands. So I'd fly back and forth about once a month, and we would present and give updates on where we were at and different things that we were working on, our status of our chemical weapons destruction, because at the time we still had some left and we were destroying them. That leads to another interesting story. We were over there in The Hague, and our delegation was approached by the representative from Libya, and he had informed us that they had located a cache of chemical weapons in the desert. And if you'll remember, this was right at the start of the Arab Spring, so things were sort of destabilizing in the region. And Libya, being a signatory to the OPCW, were obligated to declare anything they came up with. So they had told us about it, and that in turn led to an entire effort to secure and destroy in a controlled fashion all of Libya's chemical weapons that they found in the desert while the Arab Spring was sort of raging on across the Middle East. So we had done, and at the time we were under a state where there was no U.S. boots on the ground in Libya. So the closest we can get was Tunisia. So our delegation would fly back and forth to Tunisia, meet the Libyan reps at the border, make all the plans and coordination with our German and Russian counterparts to declare and do everything per the treaty for their weapons. Bottom line, and long story short, it was a lot of twists and turns, a lot of late nights, a lot of watching video feeds and white knuckles as things were taken care of. But ultimately, they were all declared, they were all consolidated, and they were all the weapons were destroyed in accordance with international norms. And so it was a complete success, and that was an interesting time just being involved in that. And then finally, I got summoned back to DTRA, back to home base in DTRA, and was waiting for my an SES position to open up. And at the time, I had a bunch of contractors supporting us, and SAIC was one of those contractors. And I was having lunch with their VP, and he said, it's been a while, and we've been talking about this for a while. I think you should come and work for us, take over the DTRA and SOCOM and JSOC portfolios. And initially said no, and then I spoke to my mentor about it, and he tells me, sometimes you need to move out to move up. And so, slept on that for a bit. Called my counterpart back at SAIC and said, let's do it. So that launched me into the BD growth sales world officially, and picked up the portfolio for SOCOM, DTRA, JSOC, and for the next 4 years at SAIC, ran that portfolio. Is a as SAIC is a giant company, upwards of 1.3 billion in pipeline and 500 million in revenue, and we did a lot of amazing things. And then I shifted over into smaller businesses and went and did a stint doing kind of what we're doing here. It's setting up growth organizations. It's doing the analysis, doing the planning, putting the right pieces in place to change growth trajectory for businesses, to diversify the growth portfolios, and really take companies on that next level of what we're trying to do with LSI. And I did that with two companies, and they were both involved in the intelligence community and a lot of data analytics, a lot of AI, ML, working at the cutting edge type of capabilities and technologies. And that's where we sort of cross paths. LSI was helping us win some of our big opportunities, providing BD as a service, providing market intelligence, capabilities analysis, pipeline analysis. So that was one of the real big things that was helpful to me. Working on with a small staff and a fledgling staff and trying to stand up a growth organization without that staff organically in place. Having a company like LSI that was able to come in from the very beginning, plug and play, white label them. LSI was behind the curtains, and we were taking all the credit for the things you guys were doing. So learn to really respect and love. Yeah, exactly. So that's where that's sort of how that happened. And then obviously you and I started chatting about the way forward here, and I'm just super excited about coming on and having that opportunity to work with, a company like LSI and diversity of the verticals that we have and the mission sets and the experience. I mean, 50 years of experience is just incredible. It's just super exciting. And I know I've yammered on for a long time here, but I want to lay that out. And it's just a weird path that, I took to get here.
No, thanks for sharing that. I think, it's like a lot of individuals and businesses as well, that you start out with a path that you think this is where I'm going, and that's not always how it happens. And I think you've got this fascinating background of government, both DoD and FedCiv, subject matter expertise. You've worked in Fortune 500 organizations and small businesses, and you really understand what the challenges are of every one of those organizations. And that's why I was so excited when you agreed to come run our growth organization, that you having that empathy for individuals inside of the government, their challenges and restrictions, inside of a large company and inside of a small company, and that you really have had this such an interesting background and history that has prepared you for the LSI experience. So thank you for sharing that. And I love your story, which is so fascinating and not linear as well. You're right. Let me, I mean, there's a lot of things that I want to unpack in this, obviously, and including what you have envisioned for LSI and our next 50 years. But before I forget, I wanted to have you go back to that time when you transitioned out of government into a commercial entity and were given responsibility for business development. And I mean, be thinking about what that was like then. So many of our clients today are in that position. And this is a time-honored tradition in especially government contractors, that they will identify oftentimes a customer that is in an executive position within the government, and develop a relationship with them, pull them out into the organization, and give them responsibility for business development of this organization. What was that experience for you in that transition?
Yeah.
And what advice would you have for the thousands of executives that are dealing with this today? Because I mean, we see it in every organization, and I mean, I've heard some just incredible stories of these executives that have done amazing things inside the government, transition out into either a large or small business, both with unique processes or not,
Yeah.
and be given this responsibility. Okay, go. You were our customer. Go out and win us business. What was that like for you? And what kind of advice would you have for executives that find themselves in that position? Because the majority of the capture and business development executives that we interface with are there.
Yeah. No, Sean, so that's an incredibly, poignant question. I think it's an important question to ask. And I think a lot of times, as you said, you alluded to it, there's a lot of failures mixed in with that because a lot of times the skills that you develop on the quote unquote inside of the government don't translate to that on the outside. And it really depends on, I think, the career path that the individual or the executive took. I think that as we on the outside from industry, we can do a better job, I think, of helping in putting them in the right positions on the industry side based on what they did on the government side. For my example in particular, you know, I had the opportunity to, sit in source selection boards, interact with contractors, have seeing that from a different angle and knowing what I liked and what I didn't like. There's no formal training you can go to. There's not a formal, I'm going to be a government contractor training course that you can take. There probably should be that comes out of the government that transitions you, but it doesn't exist. And it's really, OJT, on the job training, trial by fire. And a lot of times people get sideways and are unsuccessful because they come and they bring the intricacies of the elaborate government bureaucracy with them, that doesn't translate well into the business world. I think that's the biggest challenge. But for me, and specifically for BD sales growth, it was all about relationships. And that's one thing that I did at at DITRA and I did on the government side was international relations. We worked with multitudes of international partners. I had to work with multitudes of different clients. Like I said, all those combatant commanders, we as a combat support agency and a defense agency, it was almost like DITRA was a contractor to these other organizations, providing them with a degree of support. So we, just like we get CPARs now, DITRA got grades, and we would get those grades every year. So it was a very translatable type of experience. But I think the biggest advice I can give is it's to be BD in sales is to really sell without selling. Work to become a partner. We all do this for a reason. We're patriotic. We like the ties to the government. We like to help organizations, individuals, societies, peoples. We're doing this for a reason. Find your passion and align that passion with your customer and become a partner. Become an advocate. Serve that higher purpose to get the mutual goal. Because if you look at it in terms of partnership, I think you get a lot further, and it makes it real for you. And we as a business and we as a contractor are not just selling something, but we're becoming a partner with the people that we're working for, our clients. I like to say partners because it really is partners, either on the government side or even on the business to business side. Nobody wants to deal with the sleazy used car salesman, and that's the stigma that the government contractors have gotten. But I think for me, it's really that sell without selling, become a partner, become an advocate, and go above and beyond. We're doing this for the right reasons, and help the government and bring your skills that you've achieved in the government to the outside world. A lot of times, like I said, there's no playbook for this, so if it doesn't look right, it probably isn't right. There's not a rule book you can fall back on. Obviously, the FAR, but beyond that, when you're dealing with people, I think it's really about building relationships and having that understanding. And it's okay to be a little informal at times. I think a lot of times we're too rigid, and it's we're meeting with a government customer, and we can't say X, Y. Actually, you can. And sometimes, trust me, on the inside of the government, you want that unsolicited advice, because a lot of times you don't understand the business world. So whatever we can bring to help the government customers understand and navigate is helpful as well, because a lot of times they get stuck into these roles as well, where they'll be pulled off, active duty, put into a joint type of element, Pentagon or like an agency. And this is the first time for them as well. And it's sort of a shared learning experience. So I would just say, be genuine, but also be a partner. That would be my biggest takeaways.
I love that. That was amazing. And the reason that you have been so successful in growing these organizations, and really what I attribute to LSI's success over the last 50 years, is that relationship piece. It's unlike most of the business development consulting firms and teams out there where, that we've seen this for a lot of years, that here's the formula for winning new business, and nowhere on there is developing a relationship with your customer. It is, they want to start by stripping down an RFP, and that is you better have a good understanding of what your customer wants, what their criteria for award is, long before the RFP comes out. And I still to this day see so many individuals and organizations, organically and contract type organizations, where they dismiss the relationship piece of business development. And now more than ever, I mean, you don't have 4,000 pages to anymore in a proposal to explain every
Thankfully.
single detail. You better have a relationship and have sold this system, commodity, service, whatever it is, long before you're putting in your proposal, because you just don't have the real estate. You don't have, and not that that ever was the right solution. It was, a necessary part of the win cycle. But I mean, the most important piece was the relationship from the beginning. And I think that to this day, that is our core strategy and in all that we do within our organization and through the work that we do with our clients.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It comes down to that relationship. If you're quote unquote responding to an RFP, you're already behind the timeline. You should have already been working with that client. They should know you. They should be expecting your proposal. If the first time that the government sees your name is on that proposal at the source selection, then you're in a challenging position. And having sat there and read these, quite honestly, sometimes you're looking for ways to just, hey, let's put that in the pile that's, it's not qualified. They can't do it because you've got to read five of those that are 4,000 pages. So that it was just not, from the government side, in their defense, it's they've got to read through all of these things, and sometimes it's, make it easy for them to read, make it easy for them to grade, put a lot of signposts in there, put a lot of call outs. Personally, me, I liked a lot of pictures. If you can put, pictures in there, easily explain it. Don't make them hunt for things. Just keep it simple, stupid. Because after 12 pots of coffee and 4,000 pages, you get a little glazed.
And they're not going to read it. And especially you've got a source selection authority that has a full-time job and is trying to carve out time here and there to read through these proposals. They're not going to do it. They're going to look through it, as you said, like look at the pictures, like a magazine, and hopefully pull out key elements. And inside our organization, there's a long-standing joke, especially in the proposal teams. They know that I want artwork on every page because I know that some SES or colonel is going to be looking through these proposals, and they're not going to be reading it all. They're going to be looking at the pictures like a magazine. So all of that aligns with our strategy as well. Jason, so one of the things that was so appealing, in addition to your career history and your background in government and large and small businesses, you were also a customer of ours. And our team always said, in all of the organizations where we had worked with you and your team, how you trusted our team. You brought us in, you trusted our team, you gave us guidance, but also took guidance from our team as well. And that it was truly a collaboration between our organizations that resulted in a significant increased revenue and big wins for these organizations. And I know that is a challenge, especially bringing a third party into the tent and saying, all right, you're an extension of our organization now. And could you talk about your experience? And I know you worked with other, some of the independent consultants over the years, and you brought in subject matter experts and some of our competitors. But talk about running a BD organization, managing your organic team and your contract team, because I often get that question from our clients. How do we work with your organization? How do we make this seamless, especially when we've got this burning platform, tight deadlines, and whatnot? You do
Yeah.
so well.
No, that's another good question. So, I would would start off by saying that, for me, it was a bit of trust but verify, if you will. Start off with some small projects, start off with some, probing questions, do almost an interview of the LSI team and the capabilities, and then take it further. For me, I like you said, I had, numerous, consultants and 1099s that sometimes you don't really get what you expect. You only get a small component of what you're looking for, and sometimes it's actually not useful. In when you do that, and because you'll get it almost causes you more work. You'll get a bit of information, and it's like, okay, great. Now, what do I need to do with this? Now, I need to take this. I need to pull it apart. I need to extract it. I need to incorporate it. But when I was working with LSI, what I really, really enjoyed was it was the full picture. It was, when I got the pipeline, the pipeline was already qualified. And for those in the business, that's a big deal. These were real opportunities. They were funded opportunities. They were things that aligned to my organization's capabilities, desires, our objectives. LSI came in and do the strategic analysis of what my organizational needs were, applied that to a pipeline, and gave me a usable pipeline, as opposed to, again, some other consultants that I had worked with, where it was, here's some great information, but now I've got to go do more work to figure out how this fits in. What was unique about the LSI product was it was, again, plug and play is the best way to put it. And I immediately found it useful. And in fact, was able to, do some copy and pasting almost right into our pipelines, or turn it over to some of our BD folks and have them, run with it. And that was the important part of it. Again, it goes back to being that qualified nature of the pipeline. And then you asked another question about how do you incorporate, all of that and or work with the BD side of the house and the proposal side of the house. And as we all know, that's an interesting dance between BD and proposals and pre-BNP and BNP, and doing that analysis of, okay, how much is this going to cost? What is our risk? Is it worth the cost and the risk? What's our P-win? And then, oh, by the way, what are the other pieces that we're going to put into here? And then, I see it as there's never, I've heard people say, well, the transition between, BD and proposals. I think that it's not a transition, but it's more of a transition of level of effort. BD should never go away. All the way through, you need to have that BD person that built those relationships. Because if I'm a customer, I want to be able to speak with the voice of the customer all the way through. So it's having that BD element it's a part of the entire thing. Now, of course, your proposal manager, that they're a manager for a reason. They manage it, but they should be utilizing that BD asset all the way through. And for like the products that LSI provides, being the pipeline, the qualified pipeline, the proposal, the capture, all the way, all those pieces, I think is a cohesive element of what we provide. And it stays along with that, like I said, that relationship that goes all the way through. And, you hear the quotes of, you run through the finish line, don't stop. And that's what I think BD should run through the finish line. They should, not just stop and go away and you jump off on another. You probably will, but you need to be maintaining that relationship with the proposal team, because you bring a lot of interesting insight into the customer. And there's things that you're going to be able to put in the proposal that no one else is going to know. Why? Because you should have been talking to the customer the whole time.
I love it. No, you're exactly right. And when we look at successful BD organizations, they really have integrated the capture and proposal piece, and it really is a life cycle. And I mean, the reality is, if once you win this business and you do a terrible job, and I mean, that's going to impact your win rates going forward, not just with this customer, but a lot of customers. I mean, there's a significant emphasis on past performance and trying to share performance criteria and CPARs and evaluations by these customers across organizations. So it really is this whole LSI business development life cycle that we talk about, starting with strategy, capture, proposal, and then execution post-award. And every one of those elements of the life cycle is critical for growth and ongoing opportunities. So I appreciate all of that. So as you have, now you've been with us for about 5 or 6 months, and I've really appreciated the strategy that you've brought to LSI. I mean, one of the things that we had talked about before we brought you in was this desire to centralize our corporate business development. Over most of the last 50 years, our business development had been embedded within the business units. And you've built this organization quickly and a strategy and foundation that I think is really unique. And I mean, over the years, having been in this business, we've seen organizations that have centralized, decentralized, centralized, decentralized, and it's just this, build it up, tear it down cycle. And I really love this strategy that you've brought to the organization. Maybe talk about at a high level your thoughts around centralizing and also specializing in the selling the LSI tools.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of centralizing and specializing is a great way of looking at it. It really is a specialized element. It's a specialized capability, it's a specialized skill set. The growth is, and taking that and really reducing the burden that's placed on delivery by removing that and placing that in a centralized location, I think optimizes efficiencies. It allows delivery to focus on delivery. Now, as we all know, everybody's a salesman, everybody's BD at some point or another, but they're not focused. They're not focused on it. They're focused on what they're there for, and that's really delivering results to our customers, right? So that's what delivery should be doing. And if there's ways we can organically grow, absolutely. But I think having a strategy that runs in parallel, and it's got to be in parallel with delivery. I think you have to have, and I think it's one of the things that I enjoy with LSI. I've got a great relationship with Sarah. I think we understand ourselves and where we're going. It can't be a growth organization finding things and throwing it over the fence to delivery. There needs to be, delivery involved, and that's one of the components I think of the strategy that I'm developing and developed right now, is that having delivery being involved in this, where you're cross talking with delivery, and in fact, stood up a growth organization that aligns to our delivery organization. I think of it, to use a football reference, it's sort of like keeping a good pitch relationship between delivery and growth. The delivery is really, out front. They're the ones that are going to have to deal with whatever growth finds. So we as a growth organization have to be very well aware and in constant contact with delivery to ensure that what we're finding, what we're providing, the opportunities that we're bringing for execution, they have the bandwidth, they have the capabilities, they have the readiness to receive that new business. Because one of the worst things you can do is win new business and not have a capability to execute it. So that just underscores the need for us to be really in sync with delivery. So that was one of the core pieces of trying to get this organization right, was really, what does it look like? Because you can look at matrix organizations, you're looking across organizations, but I really felt that having a growth organization that aligned to our delivery units made sense. And then specifically having, growth and BD sales, account executives that are aligned and, specialize in a specific area. However, I look at it as almost like a 70-30 or 60-40, where the majority of their expertise and time is in a specific vertical. However, they need to be able to cross sell across the company. If the case arises, they need to be able to, lift and shift and be agile enough to do that. So that's the type of organization where it's not a rigid matrix, but I look at it as a flexible matrix where it's aligned to delivery and then has the ability to expand and contract in other areas. So that's the first piece of it, is having the organization in place, and then developing the framework that goes along with that. The marketing plan, which I think is another huge move that we made, was moving marketing and communications under growth. That really, I think, supercharges the growth organization, because as we're going to events, as we're going to conferences, as we're working with clients, we could move from, I call it, move from doing drift netting to spearfishing. And, that's really focusing in on specific clients, focusing in on specific mission sets, and enhancing the BD sales account executives' ability to interact with customers and partners, because there's a marketing and communications effort and initiative that's going on simultaneously. And then also with our current customers, marketing to our current customers, we can't forget about that. They need to be aware of the great things that we're doing. They need to sometimes be reminded, and I think that's very helpful in making sure that we're having those connections with our current customers, who are also future potential customers as well, and maintaining those relationships, and being able to tell our story in a cohesive fashion is incredibly important. And then I said a little bit about the marketing, the marketing plan and the marketing strategy, as well as the growth plan and the growth strategy, and really setting specific goals for the growth team in new areas. That's something that, one of the things that, you and I had talked about, was diversification of the LSI, account and brand, and looking into new areas. And I think one place that I'm extremely excited about is getting, more into the GovCon space, being careful in our approach as we do that. But I think there's great opportunities for us as a company to diversify along those lines, as well as maintain our BD as a service and a lot of the economic development components, which I think has a lot of potential for us as we look to the future, and looking for ways where we can cross sell and cross engage with each of those verticals is something that also I want to expand upon in the future. And again, that's more of a future goal as we lay out the plan and we enact the plan and move in a concerted fashion. One of the things about planning, and I think this is I alluded to it before, the connection between national security and business growth. Well, what are those apples and oranges? Well, not really. I mean, like I said, the analysis that goes into it, the intelligence gathering, the understanding of where you want to go, setting ends, ways, and means, I think are three things that translate directly into the business world, right? Because in the government world or in the defense world, the ends are, you want to achieve certain objectives, and they may be military in nature, and you're going to apply the means you have and across the ways. Well, I think it's the same thing in the business world. We all have goals and quotas and sales objectives. That's our ends. The ways are the marketing and the growth plan and how we get there, and the means are the capabilities and assets that we as a company have that we can apply towards that, and orchestrating that is the plan that comes together. And that's really the strategy. That's the growth strategy. That's the military strategy. And that's, I think, that the parallel that exists between two of those is important to know. And I think that there's a direct translation of that. And that's how I approach the growth plan for us. And one of the things about any plan is, as anybody will attest to, is that in the military, we would say no plan survives first contact, right? So we would have a multitude of branches and sequels and secondary and tertiary type plans that and we would spend hours in darkened rooms writing scenarios. If this happens, then this. There's some of that with business as well. If a teaming partner falls through, if something occurs, if the government decides to change the acquisition approach, the plan needs to be flexible enough to bend but not break, and be able to respond to it, and while you continue on with achieving your strategic goals along the way. So just drawing some parallels there between the government side and the business world.
in my career, I've never seen so many government organizations that are actively looking for consulting to be embedded inside their organization. And it really reminds me of 30 years ago when so many of the government contractors were looking for similar guidance and process and the tactical piece as well. There was no bandwidth in these organizations, really no expertise, no history for the most part. It was most of the business development inside these organizations were let's pull a team together and have them work nights, weekends, and holidays. And that's what we're seeing inside a lot of these government organizations, federal, state, and municipal organizations. No bandwidth, no expertise, yet they've got this challenge of whatever it is, funding or execution. And I see such an, like you, and aligned with your vision to pursue some of this GovCon type work, this opportunity is significant.
Yeah, and it's challenging too. I think
Very
it's great risk, great reward. But as we talked about, I think there's the duality of our strategy as a company is, we have to, continue with the things we do well and not diminish those at all while we move into new areas or expand into new areas. My growth strategy, like, the protect, expand, grow type of, we're always protect the base. That's key to any company. You can't erode your base and expect to grow. So it's a cumulative effect of protecting that base and then expanding and growing into new areas. But it's cumulative by building on top of that, and we can't erode that base and expect to grow.
Exactly. Jason, this has been a lot of fun, and I've got 10 more pages of notes and questions that I never got to. We'll definitely do subsequent rounds because I've got a lot of other questions that I'd like to present to you, and that we have this dialogue. A couple things as we wrap up. One is, love that you brought the Marcom team inside of LSI under your organization, aligning it with the overall corporate strategy. We've been doing this podcast now for several years, and I think we're coming up on our 100th episode. What would you like to see from the Behind the Wind podcast going forward in the future?
Yeah. So first of all, congratulations to you and the team behind the scene here, the Marcom team, working behind the scenes to put these episodes together and come up on a 100th episode, which I think is a feat in of itself. But no, it's something that I've been thinking about. I know that you and I had spoken about it, and bringing on new folks to the Marcom team, and we've chatted about it and have some ideas. I think that looking at ways to diversify our message platform and include other components to it. So, and I think it's not one or the other. It's more of all of the above. I think we're seeing as a trend in industry in terms of, video clips and more visualizations. As we talked about before, we're a visual type of society, and I think having visuals is going to be important to augmenting, and maybe even pulling in some customers and clients and doing some customer client interviews in here. And then one of the things that I would like to do is do a summary of these. So we have this repository of 100. I think having, pairing up a summary of those with the actual full episode, where folks can either go back and either read through or listen to a summary of those. I think that would be valuable, because having 100 episodes at 100 hours, it's a long investment. I think having the summaries of those would be really, really interesting for folks to go back and get the snippets of the pieces that we had before. Now, the one thing I'm gonna throw out now, and I know you and I hadn't talked about this, but this is a bit of an interesting approach that we'll see how you react. So I know you're very active. You like the outdoors. You like to do a lot of things, and being in Utah, you have access to some of the most amazing outdoor areas in the nation. Looking to find a way to incorporate an outdoor activity into the podcast, where maybe we can do take a walk with Sean, take a hike with Sean, go skiing with Sean.
Now
Maybe
you're
even
talking.
now we do a snippet on a
Skiing,
ski rip.
that is my weakness, is you'll soon learn.
Yeah. So incorporating something like that where, we can have somebody mic'd up with you while we're, it's more organic and it's more reactive, and you can incorporate some of that into it. And, even just walking around the building or taking a quick walk, it makes it a little more informal. It makes it a little more spontaneous, a little more organic. Just something to consider. So I know you'd ask for options and ways we can evolve this thing. And I think that would make it add a little interesting twist to it.
I love that idea. That's fantastic. I look forward to it. Jason, thank you so much for making the time this morning. I know you've got a lot on your plate. Just one last question. I know you're busy with 3 teenagers and all of their sports and extracurricular activity. What do you like doing when you're not working or with your kids? What are some of your hobbies and things that you like to do to unwind and your passions?
Yeah. So, and this is just not to impress the boss, but I like to ski, and I've grown up skiing. It's nowhere near as good as the mountains and the snow in Utah. I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, in the Pocono Mountains, and I learned to ski on rocks and ice and homemade and man-made snow. But from since I was 5 years old, I've skied. So not snowboarded, skied. So I do enjoy that, and I very much look forward to getting out there and doing some skiing. I used to play a lot more golf than I do now. Maybe someday I'll have the time to get back into it. But really, it's been a lot of trying to keep fit, trying to keep myself healthy throughout all the craziness, trying to find time to go to the gym, either run or do the stair stepper or just do something to get active and remain active. I think that's incredibly important. I like to do it at the end of the day to unwind. Sometimes after a long day, it's nice to go get a nice workout in and just unwind. And then unfortunately, my wife's an excellent cook, so I need to go to the gym more often than I used to, just to kind of maintain the fighting weight, so to speak. But yeah, we do really enjoy being in the DC area. It's access to tremendous amounts of restaurants, as I know and taking advantage of those has been very enjoyable for us. But yeah, I like to remain active. I would like to get like I said, more back into golf if I could, but it's just a long time commitment. But I do love skiing, and look forward to doing that hopefully this upcoming year.
You will have some opportunities this year, and I'll be your mountain guide. So
Right.
I look forward to that as well. Jason, thank you so much. And we're very excited to have you as part of our team and the overall strategy that you've put together, this new organization. You brought a lot of creative ideas, and we're excited to have you as part of the team. And we'll do a follow-on round with you. Like I said, I've got a lot of other things that I'd love to have a dialogue with you on, and look forward to that as well.
All right, thank you so much. Maybe we'll incorporate one of those on the ski slopes.
I would love it. Take care.